study of the book of Genesis. Put this on my monitor there to make sure that I connect to the right internet. And I should have removed it before we got started because that's very unprofessional, don't you think? But that's what you come to expect with us around here, isn't it? You know, we're pretty simple folks. But anyhow, I think I'm up with the right internet, and I think that we're ready to go. So, hey, Genesis, it's going to be a good day. I think that we can cover a lot of good stuff in Genesis chapter 7. And if you stick around with me, we'll actually go into some other material after that. All right, here we go. Ready? Boom. See how that worked? Genesis chapter 7. I don't want you to forget, probably, and you know me, I'm big on review, but I don't want you to forget that this marvelous book covers over a third of our human history. Here's creation. Here's us. Approximately 6,000 years. Smack dab, well, not quite smack dab in the middle, but about halfway through the first third of our human timeline, we've got Noah's Ark. And that's the subject matter this morning, as we're going to talk more about Noah and building the big boat and all that kind of thing. But Genesis, notice how that goes all the way to the death of Joseph. And so almost to Moses. And so as you can see, Genesis covers a lot of human history, and it's very, very important to our study. Now, the one thing that's interesting about Genesis is it is so far back in human history that a lot of what is said in the Bible is some of the only history we even know about that particular time period. And so it's just an amazing study, and I'm thankful to be a part of it. And there's Debbie. I appreciate her down there in Louisiana being a part of it as well. So, all right, here we go. Genesis. Here's the questions for those of you who are part of the School of Biblical Studies. Take a picture of that, and you will be able to have those as we work through this. You'll be able to fill it out as we go. Got that? All right. My clicker's not clicking like it's supposed to this morning. I think I need a new battery. Have I said that before? All right, by way of review, remember Genesis chapter 1, you got kind of the arrow pointing up, and if you could see it, you'd notice that all of the various days of creation are documented there. And so creation is chapter 1. That's not a real hard chapter to remember. And so I didn't feel like we had to go into a lot of, although it is a pretty elaborate clue. Hi, Mom. Thanks for joining. But when you come into chapter 2, you take the 2 day, the two of these, 1 and 2, and you get 2. But the reason you got 2 of them is because we're retelling the conclusion of the creation story, specifically about humanity, man and woman being created. Chapter 3, of course, you got the serpent, fall of man. Chapter 4, Cain kills Abel. You see the blood trail there. Noah, from Adam to Noah is chapter 5. And this is where we really get our first glimpse or introduction into the subject matter that we're going to study this morning in chapter 7. And so we get our first, actually this chapter concludes with this idea of Noah, okay, from Adam all the way to Noah. So you see Adam, you got the tree of the knowledge of good and evil here, and then you got the rainbow over here. I thought it was a great clue. So from Adam to Noah, and then chapter 6, Noah is directed to build the big boat. And so we get the word bubble from heaven, okay? In chapter 7, we're going to see the flood actually comes upon the planet. And I thought the lightning bolt 7 was a pretty cool way to remember chapter 7, okay? So you got the big boat floating there in the massive water that rises way above even the highest mountain on earth. Yes, I believe it was a global flood, not just a local flood. But anyhow, so you got in chapter 7, you got the flood that is going to be covered. And we got a lot of material to cover in that, so I need to not linger here too long. With regards to your memory work, Genesis chapter 7, verse 11b through 12, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. We're going to talk about that for a minute. And rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Rain fell upon the earth, probably the first they'd ever seen rain. It indicates earlier on that the earth was watered by the dew of the ground. Okay, so can you imagine when those folks get hit in the head by the first raindrop and think, what in the world? You know what I'm saying? There's my buddy David and Edie, and we got some more folks. David, Edie, Matt, Bella, Leah. Oh, thank you guys for watching. Love you guys so much. They're up there in Pennsylvania, cold Pennsylvania. You got snow up there, bro? I bet you do. Situation where the entire generation of humanity can only produce 8 righteous souls worthy of salvation. Now, I want you to pedal forward into our time zone and recognize that we are quickly becoming a generation like the generation that surrounded Noah and his family. Meaning that it's very, very important that you and I be part of the remnant. The remnant is always much smaller than is expected. And so those folks who are just casually going to church on Sunday morning, and they kind of pay, they throw a $10 bill into the collection plate, or they every once in a while check on their neighbors, and they're just not really passionately involved in Christianity. They're not part of the remnant. Noah looked like a fool when he was building this big boat. People who are part of the remnant are going to step out. They're going to be so faithful that folks are going to look at them and they're going to say, wow, what in the world's wrong with that fella? Or they're going to be drawn to the message that that particular person has. Let me turn down the heater while I do that. Consider Noah. When you understand Noah and you understand what he did, we have to give him a lot of credit because he was a man of faith, a man of righteousness, etc. But his ministry wasn't very successful if you think about it, as far as numbers are concerned. I mean, basically all he takes on the boats is family. Cindy and I are becoming more and more and more convinced as we go down this path that, the people you can count on are your family. The folks who, they're part of that biological connection that you got with each other, and people who are totally dependent upon each other. That's real family. Now, you can find that outside of a biological connection. I'm closer to some folks that are not biologically connected to me than I am my own biological family as far as extended family is concerned. I get that. But the point is you got to be totally dependent upon one another. And that's what the church is supposed to be. We're not there, but we need to continue to work towards that. So anyhow, chapter 7, verse 1, we've got only 8 are going to be on the boat. Take with you 7 pairs of all the clean animals. You might recall last time we noticed that he's going to say take 2 of each. Okay. Well, here it's not an addition. It's just an expansion of what the exact instructions are of God. We need to take 7 pair of all clean animals. And that way we're going to have food to eat. Plus, when we get out the boat on the other side, evidently that's going to mean that we're going to have a greater population of clean animals than we will unclean animals. The male and his mate, 7 pairs of the birds of heaven, male and female, to keep their offspring alive in the face of the earth. For in 7 days I'll send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. Interesting point. My buddy David, who's watching right now, sent me a text message just this morning asking a question that I don't have an answer for. But he said, okay, this says right here that I'm going to blot out. Every living thing is going to be blotted out. So what about the fish? I've always maintained that fish did not have to come onto the big boat because they could survive in the water, okay? And perhaps even reptiles and things of that nature. I don't know. But my point that David brings about, and the question, I don't know, I'd like to have you write in and tell me. So does this mean that there were fish on the ark? Because he does say he's going to blot out every living thing. My response to my buddy David was this. God has often used hyperbole in his descriptions within Scripture. Hyperbole is a word that just simply means that he'll use extreme language that generally covers the massive part of the scenario, okay? The idea of a person trying to find the speck in his brother's eye while he's got a log hanging out of his own eye. Nobody walks around with a log hanging out their head, okay? That's hyperbole. But the point is to use such extreme language that you begin to make the difference. I believe this is exactly what was happening when David says that essentially that he was born in sin. I don't think that he means that he was born a sinner. I think he means that in hyperbole, he means that the whole situation was just sinful because all of mankind was sinful. So I'm not a big fan of Calvinism, as you know. Hi, Ricky. Good to see you down there. Appreciate you. And I think maybe Sissy's watching too. I don't know. Maybe Brandon. I love you guys. Thank you for watching. So when you come to this part, I don't know, David. I really don't. I'd love to have your input on this. But if this literally means that every living thing will be wiped out, then there were fish on the boat. And I don't have a problem with that Noah was able to build some kind of aquarium. And you wouldn't have to have big, massive fish. You could have those little ones, and etc. Anyhow, write in and let me know what your thoughts are on that. And Noah did all that was the Lord had commanded him. That's huge, and of course, that's connected to this word righteous. So he was willing to go and do. But when he did this, remember, he's putting himself way out there. Some of the values that he's espousing here, and the commitment that he is making to build a big boat in his backyard when it hadn't even rained up to this point, evidently, that he took a lot of ribbing. And if not, maybe even more, he probably took a lot of persecution. He might have been thought of as the lunatic in town, whatever it may be. But then the first raindrop fell. He was willing to go the distance. His faith was so strong that it didn't even matter that all of humanity, and it seems like everybody else except his family, all of humanity looked down upon him. I have spent the last several years of my ministry feeling really, really isolated. But I haven't had all of humanity look down on me. I got a lot of friends out there, some of them are watching right now, people who continue to keep me alive with their contributions. So I don't have all of humanity looking down on me. I'm a very, very blessed, spoiled, if you will, blessed individual. Think of Noah. Here's a man who the entire planet has turned their back on him, except for the 7 folks he's going to take with him onto the boat. Think about that. And he stayed faithful. He stayed righteous. Wow. Noah is a major hero. No wonder he's mentioned in the Hall of Fame, and rightly so. Genesis 1:30 says everything that has the breath of life in it. That's interesting, says Mom, my mother. Personally, I think it was hyperbole, David says, as well. Good job, Sonny. Well, thank you, David. I love you. It means a lot to have him back me because David's a really good Bible student. And Mom, I appreciate your cross-reference there, letting the Bible interpret the Bible. My mother was using Genesis chapter 1 and verse 30. Look it up for yourself. I recognize in the recording of this that you're not going to be able to see the comments that I'm referencing over there to the right. But I got a lot of folks who are coming in with their thoughts, and I really, really appreciate it. Okay, verse 6. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came upon the earth. So I want you to understand this guy is not a spring chicken. He is 600 years old when he finally gets the big boat done and the flood waters come upon the earth. Now, we got to also remember that they're living 900 plus years at this particular point. And so being that he's 600, maybe he is a spring chicken. I don't know. Maybe he's in the mid part of his life, whatever. But all I'm saying is, comparatively speaking, the man has lived a long time. And I think that there's a really big, important application to be made from this. When you consider the generational wisdom that would have been passed down for 600 years. Imagine, my mom's big on this with regards to genealogy. Imagine, Mom, if we could go back 600 years and talk to our great, whatever grandfather who's still alive. And we could amass to ourselves all the information that great granddad knows. Yes, I think that this was a marvelous age. I think that they were much more advanced than most people think they were. I think that what took place back in the day, because of the generational wisdom that could pass down, probably produced some pretty awesome civilizations. I don't want to get crazy here, but there are some civilizations that are kind of mythological that supposedly, got buried under the ocean or whatever it may be. I'm not so sure. Most myths actually have a kernel of truth in them. And I'm not so sure about what some of those myths actually are dating back to, perhaps pre-flood civilizations, etc. My buddy Greg says that they're listening. I'm glad. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that very, very much. My mom says that Genesis 7:27 says destroy every creature that had breath of life. So Mom keeps giving us passages from the Bible, just like my mom, to make the Bible, let the Bible interpret itself. Okay. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. That's obviously 8. You do the math on your own. Of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So Noah is going to obey by taking a pair from every type of animal so that they'll reproduce after the flood, because we're fixing to wipe out the planet. Now, does that include fish? That's what we're debating. I don't know. But as you see it play out here, we also recognized early on that he's going to take 7 pairs of clean animals, okay? And so this is going, with regards to sacrifices that are going to come in the future, God, this is very futuristic that God is talking about. I mean, these are the ones that will be able, there's going to be limitations in the future about who they can eat or what animals they can eat. Sacrifices, there were thousands upon thousands of clean animals that were sacrificed under the Old Testament law in order to cover the sins of the people until Jesus came. So you can understand why having a lot of clean animals on the planet was very important to God in a futuristic way as he's looking towards that, okay? So, 2, we just said we got over there. Right? As he commanded Noah, again, we see how that Noah is keeping the commands of God. Very faithful, very righteous fellow. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So it sounds like that he gets all the folks on there, and then 7 days later, flood waters are on the earth, and here we go. And it's not a good moment. My dear friend Debbie said that she's got a prayer request. Okay, we'll get that in a moment. And so don't let me forget, Debbie, you wave your hand at me if I don't do that during the prayer time. Not that I can see you down in Louisiana, but I love you and I don't want to forget it. All right, this is where I want to get into this idea of the canopy theory. I've kind of alluded to it before, but it's very important subject matter. It's in my father's book. Let me just go ahead and get that. Let me advertise that book one more time. You can get his book now online if you wanted to buy it for yourself. You can know and look for the author Norman Childs, and if you want to look that up and get a copy of that, we have used that in the School of Biblical Studies. Come April, God willing, it will actually be available as part of the reading material that you can do in the second. There's two parts to the School of Biblical Studies. There is the live part that you're doing right now with me, and then there is the personal pace part, which means that we're going to archive a lot of this stuff so that you can just do it at your own pace. Okay. Well, this book is going to be, if I can pick it up, this book is going to be available again in that situation where you just buy it online if you want. But it's a really good book, and it addresses this idea of the canopy theory. In the 600th year of Noah's life, we already referenced that earlier, right? In 600 years. And in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, and on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were open. If we had a calendar that was actually accurate, historically speaking, we can know the exact moment that this thing begins, okay? And that's how specific God was here. But I want you to come to this part where it says, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Now, we've already made the point that evidently there wasn't rain on the earth at this point, that the earth was being watered from dew that came up from below. Two things we have to see from this, okay? The fountains of the great deep are going to burst, and the windows of the heavens are going to open up. So the water is going to come upon the planet from two directions, okay? I think that the planet was probably, certainly much more than today, it was a land mass trapping water below. I think there was much more land mass pre-flood than there is today, okay? And so the water is going to break from below. It's going to break through the crust of the earth, and it's going to come up and it's going to flood from that direction. But the part I want you to see is this ball of water called the canopy theory that would surround the earth in this way. A lot of scholars believe that this was the case. The idea that the heavens are going to open and the water is going to come from above as well. So we got the water coming from below and the water coming from on top. But the reason the canopy theory is very important is because if prior to the flood, there was this ball of water protecting the earth, a lot of things would have happened with regards to the earth. Probably the most amazing thing, let me get my head out of the way. Probably the most amazing thing is that people would live longer. Why? Because this ball of water would filter out many more of the ultraviolet rays that come from the sun and cause us to age. And so you can see how pre-flood they would live much, much longer. We got record of them living over 900 years pre-flood. Interesting thing, right after the flood, you're going to be noticing that we're going to see the age is going to rapidly decrease. Okay. Is that because the ball of water is gone? I think so. The second thing that I think, and there's many things here, but the second thing that I find to be really, really fascinating is that if there's this ball of water all the way around the earth, then it would make the temperature even all the way around the earth. There wouldn't be necessarily an equator where the earth, the sun gave it necessarily a much bigger temperature, a much higher temperature than at other places because of this ball of water. The ball of water would distribute the heat from the sun evenly as it hit that ball of water, meaning that the poles, who knows what's at the poles? It's under so much ice that we have a lot of trouble discovering it. But did you know that in many places in the Arctic, they have discovered animals that were vegetarian, or they ate vegetables? In fact, the woolly mammoths and that kind of thing have been discovered and still had vegetation in their mouth because they were quick frozen. Think about how would that happen? If all of a sudden this water breaks, the earth would very rapidly, you would have the poles just boom, they would freeze. And everything there would just go boom like that. And they would be quick frozen in place. And we're finding that to be large trees have been found on the poles, et cetera, et cetera. Read my dad's book. It's really fascinating. I think that you would enjoy it. But the point that I'm trying to make as I come back to Genesis 7 and watch my time, because I'm almost out of it, is that you need to understand that the windows are going to open, so we're going to get rain from top, and we're going to get water from the bottom. All right. On the same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and 3 sons, so 8 of them, and every beast, the livestock, and kind of every other creeping thing according to its kind, etc. They went into the ark. Noah too, and all the flesh went in, and had the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded them, and the Lord shut him in. Back to the breath of life. I think my dad makes the point in his book that breath of life would separate between those of us who breathe oxygen like we do and the fish who are in the water. I think that's made in this book. I can't recall. Dad, you can comment if you want to, but I think it's made in this book, and he furthers that argument. So you might get that, and you can be thinking of them along the same lines as my dad does with regards to that subject matter. Running towards the end of the chapter, though, the flood continued for 40 days on the earth. The waters increased. That number 40 is kind of interesting in Scripture. You might do a word search on 40 and see the number of times it's mentioned. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. Study what Peter has to say and how he equates this situation with baptism, and how the baptism doth also now save us. Does baptism save? Do you have to be baptized in order to be saved? The Bible says you do. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. Again, is this hyperbole? I don't know, David, but I personally think that this one is not. I think that it literally covered all of the mountains all the way around the earth. I think it was a global flood. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all the flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, and all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. You might notice that we don't have fish mentioned here as being part of the death register. Even everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life, again making the point that my mom was making, that died. He blotted out everything that was on the face of the ground, man, animals, and creeping things, and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out of the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. Now, I'm pretty sure that goes to the end of the chapter. And so what we have then, as we conclude here, is we're going to leave Noah on the big boat at the end of this particular. Now, you don't get hopeless, because we're going to, next time, stay with me, chapter 8, we're going to see things that happen while he's on the boat. Okay, but at this point, we have traversed all the way. Remember chapter 5? We took the genealogy thread, if you will, from Adam all the way to Noah. That introduces Noah. Then in chapter 6, Noah gets the message from God, time to build a boat. Chapter 7, boat's been built, we're on it, and we got the flood waters, 150 days. Okay. Chapter 8 will continue this particular story with regards to what's taking place. Now, I really ran through that because I'm concerned. I know we got at least one prayer request I want to take care of here in just a moment, but let's come back just real quick because I'm watching my time and I do have a few minutes to deal with this. All right, so as we see the waters prevailing mightily upon the earth, the high mountains under the whole heavens were covered, etc. The water prevailed above the mountains, covering 15. Notice this idea of prevailing that is being translated here in the ESV, that the waters are dominant. Okay, water is going to become dominant. As you know, on the planet today, we have got 70% approximately of our Earth's surface is made up of water. Okay, they say that our bodies are made up of something in that same ratio, something along that very line. One of the things we're going to see, and I don't want to spoil it yet, but eventually, okay, where's the water going to go? Well, I want you to consider how water does. Water tends to permeate, it seeps down, but if you come a real hard rain, that's why they call it flash flooding, places that normally would just let the water drain off, because of the rapid nature with which the water is coming, and remember, we got water coming up and down, because of the rapid nature of that, it's hard for it to be displaced. And so you can see how the water would sit upon the planet for a while until it finds the cracks, the crevices, and all of that kind of thing, and it begins to settle. Possibly even land masses are moving, big masses, certainly some land masses did move, but some land masses are moving and making space for the water, et cetera, okay? That's why we've heard talk of land bridges, and there, how did anybody get over here in North America when the civilization seems to have started over there, that kind of a thing. Well, again, I think that prior to the flood, most of the planet, at least much more than today, was covered in a landmass, and so it wouldn't even been a land bridge necessarily. But when the flood waters came, then you're going to find that all of that is wiped out. Okay, and we come all the way back to the original 8, and when you get to the original 8, you have to start again. So somehow, some of the original 8 that survived the flood are going to travel, and they're going to, in fact, Noah and Mrs. Noah are going to get the same command that Adam and Eve got, and that is to there be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth. And so from the original 8, then we're going to see that the planet is going to be populated. How did they get across the surface of the earth now that it's mainly water? Probably did have land bridges or something of that nature that took place. Okay. All right, I think I've covered that pretty well. If you got any questions or comments, you just bring her on. But let's real quickly here, because I only got 4 minutes. Here are the questions again, if you're part of the School of Biblical Studies that we just covered, hopefully. So when you get your weekly email, you'll be able to fill out your questionnaire quite easily. Do the doodle. I'm not sure you can improve upon Gabriel's picture there. I thought he really did an excellent job using that lightning bolt for the 7, but maybe you can. Do the doodle. It'll help you to remember the clue for this particular chapter better if you do. All right, now let's pause for a moment and do some prayer time, because I know Debbie at least has put something. Please pray for those in the Northeast with snowstorm. I have a lot of family up there. I do too. Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that. In fact, Greg, who I called Butch back from the day when he and I were young and muscular and all that kind of thing. He was. I never was muscular. But my buddy Butch, he's up there in the Maryland area, but he grew up with me in central Pennsylvania and big snows and that kind of thing. And I know that they're under at least part of that right now. So let's remember all those folks up there in the Northeast and what they're having to endure, especially some of those folks, whether it's by choice or not, that, they don't have shelter, that they're living on the street, that kind of a thing. Let's be prayerful that they will find shelter, that they'll find, comfort and all those kind of things. Again, I'm not going to get too political here, but let's remember our nation. I mean, it's just crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. King Joe has passed more edicts in the first few weeks of his being in office than I think any president in history. And when I call them edicts, that's exactly what they're, because these are just executive orders. And the problem with executive orders, as I've explained it before, hi, Gretchen. The problem with executive orders is that it takes so long for the legislative system to catch up. And so in the interim, there's a lot of damage that can be done. By the way, and I believe our previous president, President Trump, did the same thing. And I was uncomfortable with some of the ways that he went about this as well. Let me give you a living illustration. I'm not aware of a single mask mandate or social distancing mandate that has actually passed through a legitimate legislature. All of them that I'm aware of have come down from one guy sitting at the top of the state who says to himself, I think an emergency measure, this is what has to happen. Well, we're a year plus into this now, and that dictator, and we got one in Arkansas just like everybody else does in their state, that dictator has had his will that has been upheld by the rest of us without it ever being really a law. We're not talking about it. Stick around, because we're going to talk about my sermon time. We're going to talk about, civil disobedience, and is it right to go there? Well, these things are not law. What we're seeing happening did not come through the legitimate governmental processes. And therefore, I think we've got to not only consider that, there are some laws that Christians are going to have to break in the future. I'm convinced of that. But this isn't a law. This is some kind of a one-man suggestion that all of a sudden took upon itself the strength of an edict. And anyhow, King Joe has begun passing down. Pray for our nation. We are a mess. The borders are open again down south. Who knows what's being brought into our country? I'm all good with helping the poor. We need to, as Christians, but we got to use our brain with regards to some of this kind of thing. That's why God gave it to us. Anyhow, would you be praying for our nation? Okay, we need to. Lord's Day Live, time for us to join in with a discussion of Jesus and why he is so very, very important to all of us. We've been talking about the Christian resistance, principles for governing civil disobedience. And as you can see from the graphic that Gabriel gave to me, we got Jesus. This is our template. Jesus has at the temple as he went in there flipping tables, and he makes a whip and he drives the folks out. And said, we live in a day and age when I think real mature church leaders are beginning to really struggle and suffer and pray and fast under the load of what are we going to do with regards to laws that are being passed that impede our opportunity to do what God wants us to do. For instance, this past week, and again, I know folks in the future are going to be watching this, and this won't be relevant to you, but just so that you get an illustration, just this past week, the Supreme Court ruled that California must open its doors or allow collective worship services. But I'm told in the Supreme Court ruling that they could only have 25% capacity. They upheld that law, if you will, in California, and they were going to be very much opposed to singing. Because singing, when you sing, suppose that's going to spread the Wuhan virus. Well, all I'm saying is, so what do you do if you live in California? Are you going to be willing? Because singing is one of the commanded elements of worship. Are you going to go ahead and step up, and are you going to sing even though you're commanded not to sing? We're coming quickly upon a time in our history where some of us are going to have to ask some of these questions as to just exactly what are you going to submit to? I've been quite critical of some of the church leaders because I want you to think, just look over your shoulder at the last year. We have literally destroyed some churches. Church fellowship is next to nothing. Even if you do get together, you cover your face, you stand 6 foot apart from one another. There's no physical interaction. We're serving out pre-packaged communion things. You think about what we've allowed to happen to our intimacy and fellowship because we were unwilling to go the path of Jesus with regards to civil disobedience. Well, I got a lot to say in this particular lesson as we move into the second part of this. And so please just buckle your seatbelt and stay with me because with each of these, I'm going to give you a practical illustration of something you need to be doing in your life right now to protect your holiness with regards to civil disobedience. But get my head out of the way. For those of you as part of the School of Biblical Studies, here are the 5 questions we hope to cover. Take a picture of that. And here we go. Remember our 2 parts, revival, survival. This will be a minor part, but we are going to talk about the underground church as we conclude this particular series. Most of it will be about the revival, and we're using, in the revival period, we're using these 3 principles to govern it as we see Jesus did when he cleansed the temple. Consideration before confrontation, preservation, not retaliation. We're going there today. And then lastly, prioritize to evangelize. In our example that we're using as the template, here's what Jesus did in John chapter 2. It was the Passover time, goes to the temple, sees what they're doing to it, has time to sit around or stand around making a whip. Thus, our first point, and that is consideration, that we need to give consideration before confrontation. Makes a whip, drives them out. Then verse 16, it says, and he told those who were selling the pigeons, he makes this statement. And did he just whisper it? Was he just kind of a mild-mannered Messiah and just kind of said, no, friends, please? I don't think so. I think he's probably shouting this, take these things away. Then here's the point. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. The second thing I see Jesus doing as our illustration, we are Christians, right? We're following the example of Christ. So Christ does it, we want to do it. The second thing that I see Jesus doing as he cleanses the temple is the purpose for his action, the purpose for his civil disobedience. And it was that because it was not, according to the human law, it was not lawful for him to do what he's doing, flipping tables and all that kind of thing. I don't think so. Okay, so this is civil disobedience in a magnified way as far as our Lord and Savior is concerned. But what is the second thing? First one is you need to take time to consider before the confrontation. The second thing is you need to recognize why you're doing it. And if we're going to go the direction of civil disobedience, it needs to be for the purpose of preserving something, not just because we want to lash out at the government or lash out at people. We're preserving something that God says must be preserved. And I'm going to suggest to you that the preservation of that is holiness. Okay, and we're going to go to 1 Peter 1 this morning and really pick it apart. I'm going to suggest that the big application here with this idea of preservation is that we are trying to preserve our holiness. And there's much that's happening in today's world that is stealing our holiness from us. One illustration is we are quickly approaching a time when church leaders are not going to be allowed to speak out against homosexuality. We're not going to be allowed to read parts of Romans chapter 1 because in so doing, we will incite violence, if you will. It's going to be a hate crime. The legislature here in Arkansas right now is debating a hate crimes bill that I'm very much opposed to because it begins to introduce thought police and that kind of thing to the situation. But we are rapidly approaching a time when holiness, the fellowship of those who are at least trying to be righteous, this holiness is going to be difficult to preserve unless we engage in some civil disobedience. So I want you to notice in our passage the number of times, 4 times, that holy is being referenced here. Let me read the whole thing, and then we're going to come down through and we'll notice it. Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you in the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. Interesting phraseology, your former ignorance. You were ignorant in your former nature. I certainly was. But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on his name as Father, who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. Interesting phrase, we'll talk about that. Knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, futile ways, ignorant ways, and you're ransomed from that, but with the precious blood of Jesus Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. Notice the emphasis on holiness here. You should be holy because I'm holy, God says. And that holiness is further emphasized by the fact that you were ransomed, not by something that was, sort of worth it, not silver, gold, but you were ransomed by the very blood of God, the precious blood of Christ, that of like a lamb without blemish or without spot. So we're holy, 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 holy. There's 4 of them there. So this holiness idea is very, very important. So as we're looking to the subject of civil disobedience, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, is it worth it? Are we preserving something worthwhile? If we're going to exercise civil disobedience, for instance, with regards to paying our taxes or something, mundane that doesn't have a lot of impact on our spiritual condition, I think you probably need to be careful and back off there. But if we're talking about actually preserving our holiness, and the government has begun to interfere with our preservation of holiness, let me give you an illustration. We are called to be in a holy fellowship with one another. And yet we're finding that we're having to muzzle our face, stay 6 feet apart, have no physical contact with each other, prepackaged communion services, some California not even singing. I think we're at a point where some of us are going to have to say it's time for a little civil disobedience. Now let's look at this passage with regards to holiness. See the definition here. Being holy means to be set apart. It's much like the word sanctified, God, holy, sacred, etc. So that's the definition. It's one of your questions, by the way, in the School of Biblical Studies. But what I want to do now is I want to pick this passage apart phrase by phrase. Therefore, he says, in order for us to do this appropriate, civil disobedience, by preserving our holiness, he says, here's what needs to happen. Number 1, prepare your minds for actions. How do we prepare for our resistance with regards to maintaining our holiness? Well, the one thing that we have to do is prepare our minds for action. 2 things are involved there. 1 is your mind. 2 is your actions. We have got to stop, sit down, consider, premeditate, if you will. What would I do in this particular situation? It's important for us to train our children and our family to be ready for certain situations so that we have a pre-planned way of dealing with whatever it may be. If for instance, the church is forbidden to meet, what would we do? Well, what have you been doing the last year? What would you do with regards to that kind of, if the church is forbidden to sing? What would you do? Well, some of you living in California, you're living under that right now. So what are you going to do? You need to prepare for action. You need to be ready to do whatever it takes in order for you to have appropriate resistance. As I said, I'm going to try to give you a suggestion with each of these. And here's my suggestion for this first one. Be proactive. Make a list of some potential persecution scenarios that could take place and create a plan to prepare spiritually and physically for those situations. Last night we had a bump in the night. Just before we went to bed, we got all scared and everything. I actually got my gun out. Actually sent my boy to get my gun out. And he and I investigated. Well, I put Cindy in a safe spot and that kind of thing. Couldn't figure out what it was, but it really, really sounded like somebody was trying to break into her house. All I'm trying to say is I'm trying to give you an illustration. Gabriel and I have thought this through before. And we have a process, and we know where we're going with some of this kind of thing, okay? You need to have a plan because there's coming a time, more so than this moment, and especially with King Joe in the office, I think that there's a good chance that it's coming within the next few years that you and I are going to be forced into civil disobedience, into a resistance against the government. The second thing that I want you to see is that he says, prepare your minds for action, and do this by being sober-minded. In other words, you need to keep your mind about you. We, as Christians, need to be careful about medicating ourselves to a point that we're mindless. We need to be careful about certainly about substance abuse and that kind of thing that would push it. But maybe more so, we need to be alert while at the same time at peace. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you're maintaining your entire spiritual being. Be sober-minded about the conditions of the day, but at the same time, don't be panic-driven. When you are panic-driven, you're not sober-minded. Panic is when you just run in all kinds of directions, throw your arms up, because you haven't planned. You haven't paid attention to the plan. If you were here during the Bible class time, we talked about Noah. And most of the plan, all of the plan except for 8 of them didn't plan. They weren't ready. Even though Noah preached all those years, they still weren't ready. Well, we've been having preaching for the last several years about get ready. And certainly I've been doing that. And my question is, are you sober-minded about what's taking place? Here's your suggestion. Do mental aerobics. Be intentional about exercising your mind in order to develop self-control and keep your thoughts free from worldly distractions. I do it every day. There's something where I push that thought out of my mind. I intentionally, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thought. I'm doing mental aerobics. I want to be able to change the channel in my brain. I want to be able to focus on what I need to focus on. I want to take that stuff which doesn't matter and push it out so that I can stay on that which does matter. Mental aerobics, be sober-minded. The next thing is he says, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. We have got to get back to prioritizing the dream of he's coming. The wish. We got to say it to everybody that we pass. He's coming. Be faithful. He's coming. Come, Lord Jesus. That'll be the signature we put at the end of every letter. Because that should be not only our hope, it should be that which we continue to live by with regards to that which gives us sanity. All right. He says, set your hope fully on the grace that's coming because of the revelation of Jesus Christ. So look forward. My suggestion, look up. Fascinated about the Lord's return and the relief that will come when you fully bask in his grace. He says, as obedient children, we ought to do this. I've been watching my grandson. In fact, he's coming this evening to spend the night with us, and he's 4 years old. And I've been watching him as he develops. Got some phenomenal parents, and his mama especially is just tremendous in his homeschooling and in various things that she does. Just love her so much. He's got a good daddy too. I'm not trying to slight my son, but yeah. But anyhow, my point is that I've been watching the parenting things that are happening. At 4, almost 5, he's starting to develop his own personality, and he's beginning to push the limits in certain things, in that kind of a thing. But there are things that I saw his daddy do it here just recently on a trip we all took together. I saw his daddy as he got out of the van, and Judah was about to scamper off into the parking lot, and his father rather sternly said, Judah. And Judah immediately stopped, and he came back to his daddy. That's parenting that causes you to be in a childlike spirit, totally and unquestionably submissive. May I make that application to you and I as adults? Are you totally and unquestionably submitted to God? Think about that. I'm not. I'm working on it. I want to be, but there's so many discouragements that come my way, so many temptations that happen, etc. I want to be totally and unconditionally, unquestionably submissive to my Father. Suggestion, watch some children around about you and compare the level of obedience that you are giving to God with their level of unquestioning obedience that a child is expected to give to his parents. You need to make that comparison and ask yourself, are you giving that to God? Because in this day of resistance, in this day of civil disobedience, there's going to come a time when you're going to have to answer, and some church leaders are not doing a very good job answering this question right now. You're going to have to answer, is it better for me to obey the will of God than men? Maybe it's time for some of you church leaders to consider opening up your fellowship in a bigger, broader, more intimate way and recognize that it's more important for you that you are giving your flock intimate fellowship than it is for you to stay out of jail. How about this next one? As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. It reminded me a lot of Romans chapter 12. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, that present your bodies, etc., spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. We are not to be conformed to the passions of our former ignorance. You need to constantly be assessing and asking yourself, am I growing? Am I mature enough to deal with an age that calls me into civil disobedience at times? Can I survive in a time like this? My suggestion, rebel against your past. Consider the ignorant positions and the values of the world, and be intentional and obvious about your resistance to it. Think about some of the ignorant conclusions that are being drawn present tense with regards to the Wuhan virus and other things that's happening in our country. Think about some of the ignorance that's being promoted and ask yourself, am I engaged in it? Because, after all, it's the best way for me to ingratiate myself to the world. Like that was supposed to be our main thrust in Christianity. We've got to get to a point where we understand that I'm not going back to that ignorance. I'm not going back to that faithlessness. I'm not going back to that prioritizing my physical well-being over my spiritual well-being. I'm not going back there. Then he goes on to say, and that was that part about be holy as he is holy. We've already covered that. Verse 17, then on the flip side of this holiness announcement, and if you call on him as Father, clearly indicative of prayer. And so one of the things that's very important during this time of civil disobedience, the Christian resistance, is that we be prayerful people. I've upped my prayer game. I hope that you have as well. In fact, I've upped my fasting game. We're doing it pretty regular in my house now about various things because I want God to recognize that I am looking toward him. I'm keeping my focus on you, Father, because you're the only one that can solve this thing down here. Mankind can come up with 1,000 different vaccines, but until God says the Wuhan virus is going to go away, it's not going away. You know what I'm saying? So we need to pray. We need to talk to him. My suggestion to you, pray endlessly. Sounds a little bit like what Paul said to the Thessalonians, to pray without ceasing. Pray endlessly. Never pray just to be seen of men, but never hide your light under a bushel either. Be an obvious prayer warrior. I'm not saying that you need to go around being showy about your prayer life, but I am saying that it's well past time for us Christians to be brave enough, even in a restaurant or wherever it may be, to bow our heads and say a prayer so that others will see and we will also acknowledge God in what's taking place. Be a prayerful person as we're entering into this time of civil disobedience. Then he says, conduct yourselves with fear through the time of your exile. What a powerful, powerful phrase. We need to conduct ourselves in fear. And the reason the fear idea is here is because, remember, your Father judges impartially. And so you need to have a healthy respect for the fact that God is going to judge impartially. There hasn't ever been a more just or fair judge than God the Father. And understand that you and I need to really consider what our relationship is with him. He says, conduct yourself with fear throughout the time of your exile. What an interesting word. You are not intended to stay here. This is a time of exile. It's a time when we are away from home. We are not with the setting that is supposed to be the setting in which we thrive. We are pilgrims. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. All those things that we like to sing, and yet I'm not sure we actually live up to them so often. Seek ye first the kingdom. All of those things is wrapped up in this idea of make sure that you keep your focus on the fact that you're in exile. Stop anchoring yourself to this world. Think about the materialism that is encroaching upon your life and what you're doing to invest in staying here. The priorities that you are placing on I want to do this in life, and I've got this in, our bucket list, that kind of thing. Or I want to have a big house. I want to have a big family. I want to have a lot of cars. I want to have whatever it may be. Remember, although those things might be fine, if they ever get in the way of ministry, if they ever get in the way of you actually going the direction God wants you to go, you got a major problem. You got a big problem. He tells us here that we need to conduct ourselves like we're exiles. My job isn't to stay here. My job isn't even to thrive here. My job is to look forward to the going, which we've already talked about, do we not, about the revelation of Jesus Christ. Here's my suggestion. Acknowledge the exile, that we're away from home. We're not where we're supposed to be. We do not belong here, but while we are here, we must be part of the resistance, not the establishment. When you begin to look more like the establishment than you do the resistance, then you've got a great spiritual deficit. Okay, and many Christians do. I mean, you look at our big cathedrals, you look at our worship services. We've almost become a social club. And we look at the themes of ingratiate yourself to the world, kind of stuff that seems to be promoted by so many church leaders. When it seems like that the real evangelistic thrust today is to be popular in the community, rather than to speak the truth. Think about that. We are supposed to conduct ourselves like we are exiles. I don't fit in down here. I get that. And much like Noah, who spoke the truth and at the end of the day only had his family to show for it, we got to recognize the priority is not numbers. The priority is getting the truth to people. That's the priority. Also, then, notice that he says, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers And don't forget that there was a ransom that was paid, and it was a very expensive price. Thus, my suggestion, recognize that ransom. Constantly re-energize your resistance by remembering the price that was paid for you. You are valuable, so be holy. We need to be people who understand that Jesus died a horrible death. The one who created us allowed himself to be killed by the created. The creator dies at the hand of the created. There ain't another God that mankind has ever invented in all of human history that has that kind of love. And I'll tell you why, because mankind ain't that smart to invent such a God. That's why our God is not an invented God. Our God, Jehovah God, is a real God, and he's showing us what a real God would do. And that is, he loves his people so much that he would even die for them. That is the ransom that was paid. So act like it. Be a person of resistance, especially when your holiness is being threatened. Don't be a cowardice. Be an individual who's willing, if necessary, to stand up and to say, I will not go that way. I will not speak your half-truths. I will not withhold information, even if it has to do with homosexuality or transgenderism or Islam or whatever it may be. I am going to speak the truth, even if it costs me, because at the end of the day, I've been ransomed by Jesus, not by you. Think about that. So, by way of review, very, very important lesson, I think. Are you preparing for action? These are all phrases right out of that text or applications from that text. Are you being sober-minded in your warfare? Are you focused on the hope that Jesus is about to return? And when he does, I'm going to hear well done. Are you submitting like an obedient child would submit? Are you resisting the former passions of the ignorant way that you lived your life in the past? Are you calling on the Father? Have you upped your prayer game? Are you living as an exile? Or are you so anchored in this world, so much stuff in this world, that it'd be hard for me to go right now, Sonny? If the Lord called me home right now, I just, if he gave me a choice, I'd have to say, not yet, Lord. If you're living in that kind of a mode, there's a problem with your spiritual balance. Here's your questions again from this very important lesson with regards to civil disobedience. Don't forget the various things that we're doing with regards to School of Biblical Studies. Please pray for the School of Biblical Studies. We're about to expand in April, and man, I'll tell you, we're under it. We got a lot of work, and my wife especially. Last night, she was almost in tears when we just have so much going on, and she's so overwhelmed by it. She's so very important to this work, and please pray for her. But these are the 6 things that we're doing present tense. Most of these things are being recorded and put into a format. My boy Gabriel is overworked as well, because Gabriel is spending a lot of time collecting these videos, and he's going to be putting them in an archived fashion so that in come April, they will be out there for individuals who have not covered this material before. They'll be able to go there, click on it, and they'll be able to do what we're doing, just not in a live fashion. But here's the stuff that we're doing. Please join me tonight. We're going to talk about the book of Revelation, so join me there, please. I don't know why I need to take that off. We're not in chapter 8 anymore. We're actually going into chapter 10 of the book of Revelation. You need to join me tonight. But anyhow, there's what we got going. Please remember the School of Biblical Studies in your prayer time as well as in your contributions. We've had a lot of folks who in the past were contributing to us online, but because of a snafu that took place, I think it was a governmental thing, we are unable to take from that particular apparatus. They'll no longer allow gifts to come our way. And so we're using PayPal, although I'm not a big fan of PayPal, but if you had it set up in the past to give to us from that other manner, I think it was called Continue to Give or whatever it may be, we can't get your gifts from that. They're rejecting those. So if you set it up here, boy, it'd mean the world to us. You're keeping us alive, helping us to do those 6 things we talked about in the previous slide. We need you. Please stay with us. Here's our song. It's really good. It's an old one that we've all probably sung before, but Hark the Gentle Voice. Hark the gentle voice of Jesus falleth. Can you hear that in your mind? What does the voice of Jesus sound like? Ugh, think about that. Hark the gentle voice of Jesus falleth tenderly upon your ears. Sweet his cry of love and pity calleth. Turn and listen, staying here. Take his yoke, for he is meek and lowly. Bear his burden, to him turn. He who calleth is the master holy. He will teach if you will learn. Ye that labor and are heavy laden, lean upon your dear Lord's breast. Ye that labor and are heavy laden, come and I will give you rest. Perhaps it was your grandmother, your grandfather, your own mom, your dad, whoever, but you remember as a child one of those sweet memories of just laying your head right there on their chest, and you just, maybe you fell asleep there, but there was nothing like being at peace in the arms of someone who loves you. That's this line. Ye that labor and heavy laden, lean upon your dear Lord's breast. Put your head right there, your little pumpkin head right there on his chest. Cry to him, pray to him, talk to him. Let him take care of your needs. Which leads us powerfully, does it not, into this. As we conclude our discussions with regards to Lord's Day Live, it's time for communion. Here in a few minutes with my little group, we're going to do it. I pray that in your little group, you'll take time to do it as well. Think about the precious body of Jesus and the blood that was shed for you. Thanks for joining me. I pray that this has been a blessing. It's Sonny Chow saying, be there. Matthew 16:26.